Okay, in this first video in our series on rational expressions, we're going to focus on simplifying. Basically, we need to be able to reduce and simplify inside of rational expressions. And there's a very common error that comes up where people will want to cancel when it's not appropriate. So looking at this first problem here, a lot of times I'll see people want to cancel those x squareds because they match top and bottom. Canceling is actually only allowed, and reducing as well, between factors. So you've got to have a factor on the top and a factor on the bottom. And what does a factor mean? A factor is something that multiplies to give a result. In the top of this fraction, we've got 32 times x squared. So x squared is being multiplied to give as part of the total numerator, so it is a factor. On the bottom, however, x squared is not a factor because x squared is not multiplying by everything else in the denominator. So if we wanted to reduce this, what we're going to need to do is actually factor. Now on the bottom, we could factor out a 16 and an x, which will leave behind an x plus 5. So if we look at this fraction now, we should be able to do some canceling and reducing. I do have an x squared that's a factor and an x that's a factor. So we could cancel that x on the bottom, leaving just a single x on the top. We've also got a 32 and a 16 that are both factors at this point. So we can reduce those. Dividing by 16 for both of those is going to give us a 2 over a 1. And then we could go ahead and simplify this. So our final simplified result would be a 2x over 1 times x plus 5. We'll look at a couple more examples here of simplifying. Basically, you just need to factor the top and the bottom, cancel and reduce. And sometimes you're going to need to factor out a -1. We'll see that in our first example here. So I'm going to start by factoring on the top here. This does factor into, we're going to have an a minus 3 times a minus 4. And on the bottom, we've got a 4 minus a. Now that a minus 4 and that 4 minus a, I'd like to cancel them, but they're not exactly the same right now. What we can do, though, is if we factor out a -1 from one or the other, it really doesn't matter which one. I'm going to go ahead and do it from the top. If I were to factor a -1 out on the top, that would become a -a and a +4. And I could rearrange those terms and call that 4 minus a. Now it matches what we see on the bottom. So now we can go ahead and cancel those. And we can write down our final result. We no longer have anything in the bottom of the fraction, so we can just ignore that this is a fraction. We do have a -1 and an a minus 3. And we might as well go ahead and distribute that -1. That would give us -a plus 3 for our final result. Looking at our second example here, our first goal is going to be to factor. We have, in the top here, we've got a GCF that we can pull out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If I pull out an x, we'll be left with a 7x squared plus 40x minus 12 on the top. And then that's going to factor a little further, and the bottom's going to factor as well. There's no GCF on the bottom. On the top, we're going to end up with 7x minus 2, x plus 6. On the bottom, that will factor into 5x minus 4, also an x plus 6. So we do have a couple factors that match. We can go ahead and cancel those out here and write down our final results. I'm just going to leave these in factored form. As long as you've reduced everything else, that's fine. You can go ahead and leave it in factored form. So 7x minus 2 on the top, 5x minus 4 on the bottom, and that will be our final answer.